Beneath Dendera's temple floor, a carved service room records tool marks that ritual storage cannot explain. The official label is simple: a crypt for sacred objects, sealed below the Hathor temple and kept away from ordinary eyes. But near the stair access, stone dust channels and straight scoring marks cross blocks that should have been passive masonry. They do not act like decoration. Auguste Mariette documented Dendera in the 19th century. Later temple surveys copied the underground scenes in cleaner detail. The public readings stayed ritual. The lower chambers held cult equipment, divine images, and festival objects. But one narrow room leaves another possibility on the table. The carved figures, the debris paths, and the marks beside the access point appear to preserve a workshop plan, hidden under a sacred floor. That is the contradiction. The room is called storage. The stone behaves like service space. The archive record gets sharper at the first line. Dendera is not a pyramid chamber, and that matters. It is a temple complex where sacred architecture controlled movement, light, and access. The Hathor temple rose above older religious ground, with roof chapels, processional routes, side rooms, stairways, and a subterranean crypt system built into the thickness of the structure. Those crypts were not made for crowds. Some are narrow enough to force the body sideways. Some are reached through small openings, hidden stairs, or tight passages under floors that ordinary visitors would never enter. The standard explanation calls them cult storage. That is not a weak explanation. Temples needed protected rooms for portable shrines, ritual instruments, processional statues, metal fittings, and sacred images used only on selected days. A sealed room below a temple floor fits that world. But the Dendera problem begins when that storage label is forced to explain every trace. Mariette's published plates made the crypts visible to European readers long before modern visitors could move through them freely. His drawings preserved wall scenes, registers, and architectural details that later damage, lighting problems, and visitor limits made harder to inspect directly. Temple survey teams later corrected and expanded the record with epigraphic copies, photographs, and plans. Those records created the file most people see. They did not create full access. Many crypt passages remain restricted, blocked, protected, or difficult to examine at close range. Some areas appear only through guidebook summaries. Others survive mainly in drawings and selected photographs. A public visitor can stand inside the famous decorated rooms and still miss the service logic under the floor. That is where the tension tightens. The rooms sit exactly where sacred objects could be stored. Yet the carved scenes in one lower chamber do not read like simple display. They show handling. They show shaped objects. They show ordered movement through a confined architectural space. And around the stair access, the stone carries practical marks, shallow scoring, dust-catching channels, abrasion at contact points, and small chips trapped where service thresholds would collect them. A shrine can explain secrecy. It cannot explain every repeated mark. The first register gives the mechanism before it gives the mystery. In the lower register, the figures are not wandering through a myth. They stand in controlled order. One handles a rod, another presents a tray or support, another works near a shaped object placed too deliberately to be background ornament. Blocks and equipment appear in sequence, not as random sacred symbols scattered across a wall. Ancient Egyptian art can look still to modern eyes. That stillness can mislead. In tomb and temple scenes, Order often replaces motion. A process appears as a line of fixed moments. The viewer is expected to read the register from one action to the next. That is why determinatives matter. A determinative marker is a sign that tells the reader what category a word belongs to. It does not always give sound, it gives function. A divine determinative pushes a term toward God, shrine, or sacred being. A tool sign, a material sign, or a handling sign pushes the same line toward work, equipment, or service activity. In a shrine-only reading, every object in the crypt becomes symbolic. The rod is ritual. The tray is offering. The shaped block is emblem. The chamber is hidden because the gods required concealment. But the administrative reading changes the room. The chamber becomes a controlled service bay. The operator becomes a trained temple worker. The rod becomes a tool or gauge. The tray becomes a carrier. The shaped stone object becomes equipment being prepared, polished, fitted, or moved into ritual use. The line does not need to abandon religion. It only needs to stop separating religion from engineering. That separation is modern. A strong comparison comes from the tomb of Rekhmari, TT 100 at Thebes. The famous workshop scenes there show sculptors, polishers, metal workers, carpenters, and stone handlers in ordered registers. They are not shown as casual laborers. They are organized by task, material, and sequence. A viewer sees raw material, shaping, finishing, carrying, and delivery. The Dendera crypt scene is not identical to Rekhmari's tomb. It belongs to another period, another building, and another sacred setting. But the logic is recognizable. Figures handle tools. Objects move through stages. Material appears to be prepared before it is presented. That is not loose myth painting. It is controlled work shown in temple language. The lower room scenes have often been pulled into wild claims because Dendera is famous for carved forms that modern viewers compare to lamps, tubes, or machines. That noise can bury the more important question. The real technical problem is not whether one carving looks modern. It is whether under-temple service rooms preserved a record of sacred equipment being made ready below the ritual floor. The archive record is more specific. The sequence begins with a chamber, then come operators, then come rods and handled objects, then come shaped stone pieces and presentation surfaces. The order resembles preparation before display, not passive storage after display. If the carving only meant divine symbolism, the room could be read as a hidden shrine. If the carving also records service procedure, the crypt becomes evidence for a different kind of sacred infrastructure. A workshop under the temple does not mean a modern factory. It means controlled technical work inside a protected religious system. That distinction matters. The translation would be interesting by itself, but the stone adds a physical test. Near the access routes, the floor and blocks carry marks that belong to contact. Some are straight scoring lines, narrow and repeated. Some are shallow grooves that follow the same practical paths a moved object would follow. Some are abrasion bands, flattened by repeated rubbing rather than carved for visual effect. Decorative carving has a face. Workshop contact has a habit. A ceremonial cut is usually placed where it can be seen, read, or framed. It belongs to the surface that carries the message. Repeated service marks appear where weight, dragging, lifting, fitting, and cleaning would happen again and again. They gather around thresholds, sockets, corners, channel edges, and points where a block meets a tool. Dendera has those awkward places. There are sockets that do not behave like decoration. There are block channels that look more practical than symbolic. There are chips caught near service thresholds, where debris would settle if objects were shaped, adjusted, or cleaned in a tight room and then moved toward a stair. The harder problem begins with the measurement. Straight scoring marks are not proof by themselves. A single line can come from later damage, restoration, careless movement, or modern contact. But repeated straight scoring beside a service access changes the question. It asks why the same kind of mark appears where a tool or stone carrier would meet the floor. Egyptian stoneworking was not simple. The old picture of copper chisels solving every hard stone problem has never been enough. Copper can work limestone with skill and patience. Granite, basalt, and hard siliceous stones require abrasive logic. Quartz sand, harder than copper, can cut when carried by a saw, drill, or rubbing tool. Flinders Petrie understood this problem in the 19th century. His observations on Egyptian sawing and drilling focused on the physical signature left by tools: saw cuts, drill cores, striations, feed marks, and the difference between soft tool pressure and hard abrasive action. Petrie did not need fantasy to see the issue. The stone itself held the record. At Dendera, the question is not whether priests used modern machinery. The question is whether temple service rooms contained controlled maintenance work using ancient abrasive methods, gauges, carriers, and fitting tools. That is a stronger claim, and it is easier to test. A copper chisel leaves impact logic. It chips, it dents, it bites in short blows. Abrasive cutting leaves another logic. It grinds, it scores, it rounds the edge of contact. It can produce straight or slightly wandering cuts, depending on the guide, pressure, sand, and repeated motion. Imagine a wooden saw carrying quartz sand through a stone surface. The wood is not the cutting edge, the sand is. The tool becomes a carrier for harder grains. The mark is made by repeated movement under pressure. That principle explains why soft tools can leave hard marks. It also explains why a temple workshop would need channels, trays, water, waste control, and restricted service routes. Abrasive work creates dust. Polishing creates slurry. Fitting creates chips. Maintenance creates wear where the same object is moved from chamber to stair and back again. Those are not clean ritual traces. They are work traces. The public translation stops before the operating phrase. It tells the viewer the room held sacred equipment. It rarely asks whether sacred equipment required technical preparation under the floor. But the lower register points to handling. The access stone points to repeated contact. The debris logic points to activity, not display. A shrine can be still. A workshop leaves scars. That difference is visible when a groove crosses a block near a threshold. If it was carved as decoration, it should belong to a scene. If it came from use, it should align with motion. The Dendera marks align more closely with service movement than with display planning. The same signature appears where the public story says it should not. Karnak offers the first comparison. Behind the grand ritual spaces and processional axes, service corridors cut through the temple mass. These passages are not the image most visitors remember. They are narrow, practical, and controlled. Priests and temple workers could move equipment, prepare offerings, pass behind walls, and operate the building without breaking the sacred front. A temple was not only a sacred image, it was a managed machine of rooms, doors, routes, stores, and restricted handling. At Karnak, That hidden service logic sits beside the largest religious architecture in Egypt. It does not make the temple less sacred, it makes the sacred system more technical. Abydos gives another echo. Side chambers near carved processional scenes show how ritual movement and object storage were built together. Sacred objects did not appear in the main space by miracle. They came from rooms, supports, carriers, and trained handlers. The carved wall shows the ceremony. The side chamber makes the ceremony possible. Dendera fits that pattern, but with a stronger underfloor clue. Its crypt system is below the sacred walking surface. The scenes are carved in hidden rooms. The service marks appear near access routes. The architecture protects the action from public view while keeping it close to the ritual core. That is exactly where technical preparation would belong if it was part of temple practice. The Serapeum at Saqqara supplies the hard stone comparison point. Its giant stone boxes have turned into symbols of Egypt's stoneworking problem because they force the viewer to confront scale, finish, and material. Whether one accepts every claim made about them or not, the Serapeum proves one thing. Egyptian sacred installations could involve hard stone objects that demanded careful cutting, smoothing, moving, and fitting. That point returns to Dendera. If sacred stone objects required preparation, then service rooms near sacred space become more than storage closets. They become part of the operating system. The temple needed places where equipment could be checked, fitted, cleaned, polished, and staged. The cross-site pattern is narrow, but it is consistent. Karnak shows hidden service corridors behind ritual architecture. Abydos shows side chambers tied to processional images. Saqqara shows sacred hard stone work at a level that still challenges simple tool explanations. Dendera combines the three signals under one floor: a restricted room, a carved handling sequence, tool marks near the access. That does not prove every crypt was a workshop. It proves the storage-only label is too small for the evidence. The temple could hold sacred equipment and technical service activity in the same protected zone. The record does not fail at the science, it fails at access. The concealment began in the architecture itself. Dendera's crypts were built into the temple mass, below floors and behind controlled entries. They were meant to be hidden, not because they were modern secrets, but because sacred handling was restricted. Access belonged to trained people, specific rites, and protected objects. That ancient restriction became a modern problem. Damage came later. Christian-era defacement struck many Egyptian sacred images, including temple reliefs that later readers had to reconstruct from broken surfaces. Sand burial protected some areas and swallowed others. When early explorers cleared and copied the temple, they did not produce a full modern engineering survey. They produced plates, descriptions, and selected records. Mariette's plates became the substitute for direct inspection. That matters because a drawing preserves iconography better than wear. It can capture a figure, a tool shape, or a register. It cannot capture microabrasion on a threshold, residue in a groove, or the difference between a ceremonial line and a contact scar. A plate can show what the wall says. It cannot fully show what the floor suffered. Later epigraphic projects improved the reading of signs and scenes. They gave scholars better copies and cleaner temple documentation. But epigraphy is not microwear analysis. A wall copy answers one set of questions. It does not test stone dust, trapped residue, or tool contact at floor level. The missing test is physical. High-resolution laser scanning could map the straight scoring marks in 3 dimensions. Photogrammetry could compare every groove near the stair access to known workshop marks from Egyptian stoneworking sites. Microscopic wear analysis could distinguish repeated abrasive contact from random damage. Residue sampling could test for quartz dust, stone powder, polishing compounds, or later contamination. These are not impossible tests. They are ordinary tools in modern archaeology and conservation. The difficulty is location. The marks sit in fragile, sacred architecture, sometimes in confined spaces, sometimes in areas not open for routine access. Any intrusive sampling requires permission. Even non-contact scanning requires equipment, lighting, staff time, conservation review, and approval from the authorities responsible for the site. That is where the file slows down. The public can see selected images. The public can read the ritual label. The public can repeat the phrase, cult storage. But the physical test that would challenge or confirm the workshop reading has not been placed in front of viewers as a complete published file. No full surface scan, no open residue table, no complete comparison between Dendera service marks and known workshop wear. The gap is not proof of a hidden machine. It is proof of an unanswered test. And the unanswered test sits exactly where the strongest marks appear, near access, under the floor, beside carved handling scenes that already blur the line between sacred storage and technical preparation. This is where the unanswered question becomes current. Let me be clear. The evidence under Dendera does not prove a modern factory beneath the Hathor temple. It does not prove a forbidden power plant, a lost electrical room, or a machine age hidden intact under the floor. That claim would go beyond the stone. What the evidence does show is more precise and more useful. Under-temple rooms may have served technical preparation, maintenance, polishing, cutting, fitting, or staging roles connected to sacred stone objects. The carved scenes show ordered handling. The access marks show repeated contact. The debris logic points toward work that happened close to the ritual core. That is enough to disturb the clean public explanation. Modern categories separate temple from workshop. Religion goes in one room, engineering goes in another. Ancient Egypt did not have to obey that division. A sacred object still had weight. A sacred stone still needed fitting. A ritual surface still needed preparation. A divine image still required handlers, supports, polishers, tools, and controlled routes through architecture. The strongest implication is not that Dendera hides a modern industrial system. The strongest implication is that ritual space and engineering space were integrated. The temple did not merely store sacred equipment. It may have maintained it, adjusted it, and prepared it below the floor, behind walls built to keep that work out of public sight. That reading changes the room. The crypt stops being a symbolic box. It becomes a protected service chamber inside a sacred machine of stone. The figures on the wall stop being only religious decoration. They become a record of trained hands moving material through a controlled sequence. The object is still there. Beneath Dendera's temple floor, the narrow crypt still holds the same problem it held when Mariette copied its scenes. The wall records handling. The access stones record contact. The official label records storage. Those three records do not line up cleanly. The carved workshop sequence is still visible in the archive plates and later temple records. Figures hold rods, trays, blocks, and shaped objects in ordered positions. They do not appear as a single burst of mythic imagery. They behave like a procedure translated into sacred art. The straight scoring marks remain the physical question. A ritual explanation can describe why sacred equipment was hidden. It can explain why images were protected below the floor. It can explain why only trained temple personnel entered narrow crypt passages. It cannot, by itself, explain repeated abrasion where objects moved, grooves where tools or carriers touched stone, chips trapped near thresholds, and service channels that make better sense as dust or slurry control than as visual ornament. The missing work is clear. The room needs complete photogrammetry. The access stones need laser scanning at high resolution. The grooves need micro-wear comparison with confirmed Egyptian workshop marks. Residue in channels and dust traps needs testing. The results need to be published beside the epigraphic record, not hidden behind a single ritual label. That would not destroy Egyptology. It would make the file stronger. If the marks are later damaged, the scan can show it. If the grooves come from restoration, the surface can show it. If the debris is unrelated, residue testing can expose that. But if the marks match repeated ancient service work, then Dendera's underfloor crypt becomes evidence that temple engineering has been underestimated. The public story should be able to survive a measurement. That is the simplest test of any official explanation. For now, the viewer is left with a room treated as storage, a scene that behaves like procedure, and stone carrying use marks where a workshop would leave them. Not a myth alone, not a modern factory, a sacred technical space, sealed into the architecture and softened into ritual language by later summaries. If forbidden ancient history belongs in the evidence file, subscribe to Hidden Nile Archives. The Dendera crypt does not need a wild claim to matter. It needs access. It needs scanning. It needs the floor and wall read together. Until that happens, the stone record still points below the sacred floor, where the tool marks wait under the temple.